Timecop. A novel by S.D. Perry, based on a screenplay by Mark Verheiden. Story by Mike Richardson and Mark Verheiden. This is a Pliskin audiobook presentation. Time Enforcement Commission, Washington, D. Saigon 2004. Two uniformed guards walked on either side of Atwood, holding his cuffed arms. Walker was with them. He tried to get Lyle's attention, but Atwood kept his blank stare on the tiled hallway floor. The hall smelled like a hospital. There was a hint of death in the air, though Walker knew that was only his imagination. They were just outside the sentencing chamber when Walker nodded to the two guards, who moved a meter away from the shackled prisoner. The recycled air of the facility was cool, but Lyle still sweated heavily. He looked out of place in his 20s suit, his tie crooked, his collar open. "Testify, and I'll do what I can," said Walker. Atwood didn't look at him as he pushed the doors open with one shoulder and walked into the chamber. The guards moved forward to accompany him, and Walker followed. There was no jury, no bailiff, no staff. The other techs didn't even bother calling it a courtroom. 3 judges sat behind a high black dais. The one in the middle, Corinne Keach, had a gavel in her hand. She rapped it on the black counter, and the quiet room got quieter. She was the Supreme Justice for TEC. And Walker knew what was coming if Atwood kept mum about Macomb. Keach was fair, but TEC laws were severe. Walker looked at Lyle, who still wore a dull look of resignation. Keach spoke, her voice as cool as the air in the chamber. "Lyle Atwood, you're charged with violation of TEC Code 40.8, subsection 9. Time travel with intent to alter the present." One of the uniformed officers stepped forward and placed Atwood's credentials in front of the judge. She looked them over, her expression firmly disapproving. "The charges are compounded by your current status as a TE officer." Her gaze rested on Atwood. "You know how serious this is," she continued, and her tone held an edge of something like sorrow. "Do you have a statement?" Walker looked at Atwood. "Tell her," he whispered. Lyle wouldn't look at him. "He only leaves you one way out," Atwood said softly. "I knew that. I took the risk. Sorry, Walker." "Damn it, just say the name." "One word." Keach raised her voice. "Mr. Atwood, do you have something to say?" Walker stared at Lyle. "Yes. Come on." "No, Your Honor." Walker's ex-partner slumped, but his jaw was set. "Nothing." "Then I will pass sentence as mandated by our charter," said Keach, and she motioned for the other 2 judges to lean in. They spoke quietly. Walker could feel his own desperation. "Lyle, say something." Keach looked up. "The defendant has been found guilty without extenuating circumstance. They're gonna kill you, Lyle." Atwood watched the judge. "Therefore, the mandatory sentence of death is to be carried out immediately." Lyle glanced at Walker and smiled weakly. "Take care of yourself, Max." Keach slammed her gavel down. It was over. After it was over, after he'd seen the execution, Walker closed the door to the screening room behind him gently, unable to erase the image of Atwood from his mind. Unlike a civilian proceeding in a state or federal court, TEC rulings were final and swift. No appeal. After all, if something did turn up later to gainsay the crime, a TEC execution could be reversed. A man could be brought back from death, after a fashion. Lyle had died quickly, within real-time hours of the sentence. Walker started down the busy corridor, nodding absently to the officers who called his name in passing. He felt a tiredness that surpassed the physical aspect of exhaustion. His brain felt heavy, used up. With every death conviction, he hit the screening of the sentence. He didn't want ever to take his job lightly, and that meant seeing the consequences, no matter what. TEC kept them on file, and they were filed forever in his memory. Maybe he shouldn't have watched this one. The monitor had shown Lyle appear in thin air, 5 stories up in front of the Floatbower building, the time and date stamped on the corner of the screen. Within a few seconds of the time, he and Walker had gone out through the window together. This time, Lyle was alone. Falling. He hit on his back, bounced, and died. Internal organs ruptured by the sudden stop. The cop Walker remembered from their jump stepped to the shattered body and put a newspaper over Lyle's face, no doubt thinking he was another rich broker, wiped out by the stock market's crash. So there it was. Atwood was dead, and through the intricacies of the chronometric paradoxum, executed more than 40 years before he was actually born. The whole thing was enough to drive you crazy, but there it was. A jaunt back a year ago would find a younger version of Atwood, still working for tech and bitching about it. But from this point on, he didn't exist. Crazy. Walker had learned to live with the impossibility of it. He was stopped by the bulletin board outside of the squad room. A grinning, bearded face looked up at him. "Aaron McComb for president in 2004. Was scrolled out at the bottom of the poster. Somebody kissing ass must have put the poster up. Walker studied the picture, reached out to touch McComb's image. Cultured, sophisticated, and ruthless, if Atwood had told the truth. Atwood died because of him. Walker was certain of it. The man hadn't had a reason to lie. He stepped into the squad room where Matuzak was briefing the group. He looked harried as usual, but in control. He was a good director and a good man. Hands-on, not just a political hack appointee who had never worked the streets. The boss was a cop's cop, come up through the ranks. Everybody respected him. When push came to shove, he was still a good man to have at your back. As good a friend as Walker had, though that wasn't saying much. He'd pulled into himself after... Matt looked at Walker across the room, nodded, then went back to the smudged monitor at the front. Walker moved past the scarred wooden tables and battered-looking computers to his own desk. The room was too small to accommodate them comfortably, but their budget had gone steadily downward. Walker knew that the program was under consideration for renewal. They all bitched about it, but the tiny room and long hours for shit pay were the way it was right now. Word was, somebody was out to kill the unit. And how many of these people are working for McComb? Matuzak used a laser pen to point out a disturbance on the screen. We're picking up some noise outside Camp David 79. Intelligence thinks it's a kill team out of Iran. One of the cops, A dark-haired young gun named Swirling broke in. If it is, that's their third try this year. Problem with time travel was that other people had it. The only functioning chronometric gear online in the U.S. was under government supervision. The unit here and the original experimental station were the only officially listed units in the States. Probably the military branches had a station or two, under top secret wrap, of course. But other governments knew how the new toys worked, and they weren't so scrupulous about how they mucked around in the past. Matuzak nodded. CIA's trying to locate their launch and take it out. He stopped and peered at Walker closely. You look like shit, he said, not without sympathy. Matuzak had liked Atwood. We have to talk, said Walker. In a few minutes. Walker gritted his teeth. He couldn't say anything in front of the others, not if Macomb had some of them in his pocket. Now. Matuzak shrugged. Okay, 2 minutes, he said, and turned back to the screen. Walker dropped his paddle-holstered gun loudly on his desk and then fell into his chair. A couple of minutes wouldn't make any difference, would it? They had plenty of time. Matuzak went on. I want 2 teams working the date, before and after. He started calling out names. Walker looked at the one photo on his desk and felt another pain, an older one. He reached out gently and stroked the image of Melissa's face, her features frozen into a smile 10 years old, from the day she had died. She had said it, that he would be glad he had the picture. The words had haunted him through time. Time travel with intent to alter the present. Code 40.8/sub-9. He searched again, as he had so many times before, for something in her smile that would tell him why it had to be this way. I'm sorry, Melissa. Matuzak had moved on to the second case. Localized in L.A., 1902. Looks like we got someone trying to get a jump on the real estate gig. Purvis, you, and Leroy. The door opened. Everyone in the room looked up, including Walker. He heard Matuzak curse softly under his breath. It was Spota, the president's lackey. He had with him a group of dignitaries and aides, undoubtedly to take what Matuzak called a pocketbook tour. And there was Senator Macomb with them, arms crossed. Walker had to fight to keep from reaching for his gun. Matuzak finished up, his face neutral. Go over your dispatch notes, file your departures, and check with me before launch. George Spota stepped in with a wide smile. His short, dark hair was speckled with white. The job had aged him. Good afternoon, gentlemen. The officers stood up, and Spota led the tour over to Matuzak. The men in suits took in the crowded squad room with thoughtful expressions. Spota started with the introductions, but Walker had fixed his gaze on Macomb's lean face. Senator Nelson, this is the TEC director, Eugene Matuzak. Senator Nelson is the newest member of the Oversight Committee, and we thought he might like to see how your annual budget is spent. Macomb moved closer to the group, and then smiled coolly as he acknowledged Matuzak. Walker could hear the ass-kissing in Spota's voice. Senator Macomb, our long-standing committee chairman, has graciously agreed to take time out of his busy campaign schedule to accompany us. Bullshit politics. Matuzak knew who Macomb was, the man who wanted to take the TEC down. What he didn't know was what else the man was into, something that Walker was going to enjoy telling him. It'd be my pleasure to show you around, said Matuzak. Walker heard the well-hidden strain in his voice. Nelson acted interested, very politically correct. And are these your agents? He asked the question as if speaking about a room of schoolchildren. Matuzak nodded. Most of them. Agent Shepard, Agent Timmons, swirling. Each of the officers bobbed their heads at Nelson. Gordon, Agent Walker. McComb swiveled his head to meet Walker's stare. Agent Walker, I've heard a lot about you. The room went still and Walker shrugged faintly, let his stare get harder. I've heard some things about you too, Senator, he said, his voice without inflection. McComb smiled. Not all of it bad, I hope. Walker let his silence and smile answer. Matuzak broke in quickly. Agent Walker has just returned from a successful mission. Senator Nelson smiled. Well, congratulations, Agent Walker. Walker didn't take his gaze off of McComb. Matuzak kept talking. If you'll follow me, gentlemen, I'll show you where we kick off. The group was herded back toward the door, but McComb moved closer to Walker. The senator wore a polite, curious smile for the room, but his eyes told a different story. I'd love to hear a little more about your recent assignment, Agent Walker. Why don't you join us? His voice was innocent and pleasant, but his gaze was hard, sizing Walker up with a smooth intensity. I have a report to file, Walker began. Matuzak grinned at Walker, exposing too many teeth. Agent Walker would be delighted, Senator. Walker nodded slowly. Of course. Fucking delighted. McComb gestured Walker to the door first with one slender hand as Matuzak hurried to the front of the group. McComb wore a smile that would freeze nitrogen. After you, he said, and Walker could hear the truth in his voice, sleek and polished as it was. McComb was dirty. The man reeked of guilt beneath his expensive cologne, and Walker was going to nail his ass to the fucking wall. Might as well size him up now. Find out what the man was made of. Because after watching Lyle fall to his death more than 80 years in the past, he was damn sure going to take down the man responsible for it. One way or another. 6. Walker was good, but Aaron McComb had made his career on reading people, on being able to see past the facade. He wasn't too happy with what he saw. Walker's hatred seeped past the cool gaze. Atwood had talked. He could see it in Walker's dead, cold eyes. Well, too bad. Too bad for Walker. They started down the corridor behind the rest of the group. Walker hung back a bit, allowed the two of them to fall a few paces behind. Good. At least the man was discreet. McComb's Secret Service agents backed off some to give them a little more privacy. Not too far. And they watched Walker, too. If he did anything sudden, the candidate's bodyguards would be on him like ugly on an ape. Then again, this might still be salvageable. McComb owned enough cops to know most of them had their prices. A few carefully placed bucks might just grease this squeaky wheel away. Money always talked, and enough of it usually shouted down any opposition. It was better to own your enemy than fight him. He'd find Walker's price, and poof. End of problem. Meanwhile, that prick Matuzak was up there pitching Nelson. As you can see, Senator, we have spared every expense. No comfort, no convenience, no necessities. Watch your head there. Huh. They passed a gate that had Lock 4 printed across it in official-looking letters. At the base, a man with a screwdriver poked at a panel in the wall. Exposed girders and I-beams crossed overhead. It really was a stripped-down operation. Nobody was getting fat around here. No, the extra money was being bled away much higher up the food chain. Macomb had seen to that. He was even getting a little himself. Peanuts compared to what he was going to rake in once he got the job as head honcho. Money flowed to where the power was, and he was going to be the most powerful president ever. And then some. Walker didn't say anything, so Macomb decided to take the offensive. So, Agent Walker, your latest mission. Who were you after? Walker turned his cold eyes to Macomb's. Yeah, he was a tough one, or at least he thought of himself as such. They were going to dance a little. What the hell, it was something to do. A man named Atwood, said Walker. He had a European accent. French. Belgian, maybe. Sound familiar. Macomb walked on. Atwood, Atwood. He raised his voice slightly so that his aide, Lawrence, could hear. Why should that name be familiar to me? Matuzak interrupted himself to call back. Unfortunately, Atwood was a TEC agent. Really? Said Nelson, all ears. Senator Nelson was a real loser, the fat fuck, but he played the game well enough to keep getting reelected. And Macomb needed his vote. Better the moron you know than the moron you don't. Macomb kept his voice up. That sort of thing happens. As a matter of fact, it's one of the dangers of even having an agency like this. Not really necessary, this whole little charade, but it would be interesting to see who took the bait. George Spoda cleared his throat, but kept his voice low and respectful. Imagine the dangers of not having it, he offered. Sharp as he was, Spoda was on the way out. He was a lame duck, and everyone knew it, but still he tried. He was smart, and that made him dangerous. Macomb had no real use for him now, though the feeling wasn't malicious. It was just business. When he got the presidency, he was going to make certain that Spoda went somewhere he couldn't do any damage. Alaska, maybe. Or Peru. A nice job as a fry cook. Or a deckhand on a fishing boat, maybe. Or a concrete overcoat and a nice room in Davy Jones's locker. He grinned at the thought. Later. Right now, he had more pressing matters to attend to. Did you know this Atwood? His voice was mild. How much would it take to buy this guy? Couple $100,000? Chicken feed. Walker loped along, obviously wanting to lean forward and scrape the ground with his knuckles. A mouth-breathing muscleman with a chip on his shoulder. How? Funny. He was my partner, he said. His voice was clear and if not exactly cultured, at least educated. It clashed with the man's apparent stupidity. He had to know who Macomb was, had to know the contrast was like a gnat against an elephant. Macomb shook his head in mock sadness. Ah, too bad. There's nothing worse than a rogue cop. Jesus. Was this clown going to start spouting lines from an old Bogart movie about when a man's partner got killed? Guys like this went out with the dodo. Walker looked at him squarely. Except maybe the man who paid him to do it. He flashed a tight grin. Nasty. Macomb tilted his head skeptically. If there is such a man. The agent walked on. There always is. What was the expression? A fly in the ointment. This fly wanted to play a little before he got squashed. Fine. Come into my parlor, little bug. Better say goodbye to your friends first. I see. And do you know who this man is? Oh, yes, I know. If looks could kill, Macomb would have been a smoking lump on the floor. He guessed that if the cop had thought he could get away with it, He'd have pulled his gun and shot him by now. But the Secret Service guys would take him out if he went for a gun, cop or not. McComb didn't have much use for the service muscle. He liked his own better. But the official heat had its uses. Everybody knew they were there and fast on the draw, all wired together with their little earplug radios into one big multi-headed unit, willing to die to save him from an assassin. McComb smiled gently. Then why don't you arrest him? Walker fired another glance of icy hatred at McComb, and then looked away. I lost my witness, he said, unreadable except for that look. Now McComb loosed the sigh. Too bad. I'm sure we'd all like to see the general in charge brought to justice instead of the common soldiers. I trust you'll keep working on it. Max Walker glared into him. You can bet on it. McComb kept his face neutral. No point in trying to bribe this one. He'd met a few along the way to whom money meant nothing. Zealots who'd rather die poor for truth than live high and rich without it. This guy was one of those. A pity. They walked on. Matuzek led them into a room full of monitors, the operations room. McComb hadn't really expected the agent to take an easy way out, and now there wouldn't be one. He was going to have to die. So be it, chump. Too bad. So sad. McComb smiled. Matuzak droned on. We've updated our entire operation to state-of-the-art Parker data link systems, utilizing their brand new superconducting wet light chip. They all looked back at McComb with smiles of brown-nosing sympathy. George Spoda couldn't resist the opportunity to rub salt in the wound, even though they all knew the story. As you know, Senator McComb sold his half of the Parker Company just before they got the patent on the forerunner of that chip. He smiled sadly. Bet that cost you a few billion, Senator. McComb smiled a tight, embarrassed smile at Spoda. He was fucking himself over, didn't he know that? Gonna sleep with the fishes. Bad luck, said Walker smoothly. Win some, lose some, McComb said as he stepped past him to address the group. Enough games. My concern is the taxpayers' money, he said. He was done playing nice. They wanted to poke at him, let them see what happened when he woke up. At a time like this, when so many of our citizens are unemployed or unprotected, I don't think we can afford to continue supporting a project like this. A project that might be more dangerous than the problems it claims to protect us from. Senator Nelson frowned stupidly. What dangers? McComb addressed the question as though it were an intelligent one. Well, take dishonest agents like this. Atwood, he said. They could take advantage of the situation for personal gain, and in doing so, wreck time. Even by accident, the ripple effect could cause problems in their future. Our present. Look at a minor example, for instance. When an agent goes back, he risks contact with a past version of himself, assuming he lands in his own lifespan. And from what I understand, that in itself could be a disaster. Nelson wasn't going to get it without little words, big charts, and bright colors. Maybe not then. Why? He asked. Matuzak stepped in, cutting off his query with a glare. It's all in the technical reports. His voice was dismissive. However, it's never happened. We're very careful. McComb smiled winningly at Nelson, and saw that he was going to get the vote he wanted soon enough. That's what they used to say at 3 Mile Island. What I propose, Senator Nelson, is far less costly and accomplishes the same thing. Prevent time travel altogether. rather than spend stupendous amounts policing it. You can't hurt what you can't get at. If nobody goes back, then nothing can be changed. Macomb nodded to Walker in mock politeness. Now, gentlemen, I'm afraid I have to get back to the Hill. Senator, he smiled at Nelson again. This is a project we can live without. I hope I'll have your vote against continued appropriations. He looked at Walker again. Agent Walker, I must admire your dedication. I do hope you'll keep trying to get your man. Walker didn't blink. He moved closer to Macomb. I never quit. You can bet your life on it, Senator. Macomb ignored him and followed Lawrence out of the room with a half bow to the group. Oh, you're going to quit, all right. Macomb didn't laugh out loud until they were safely out of earshot. The white limousine cut easily through the darkening D.C. streets. They passed the Capitol, its dome lights piercing the twilight as Lawrence prattled on from his side of the plush leather back seat. Macomb idly fed himself salted peanuts from a cut-glass bowl. In the front, Palmer, Macomb's security man, glared at the whiny aide, but Lawrence was, as usual, oblivious. The Secret Service rode in the cars ahead and behind them. Macomb only allowed his own people to ride with him. He could do this as a candidate. After he was elected, maybe not. But by then, who cared? He could be as straight as a Texas interstate after he was in charge. Figures in the suburbs are encouraging, but they're killing you in the urban centers. Walker reminded Macomb of someone he had known a long, long time ago, from childhood. The neighborhood pet, a bright, athletic kid named Esterhaus. Tommy Esterhaus. Tommy had run errands for old ladies, had a paper route, and been incredibly popular with the other parents. His name was mostly used in sentences that started with, "Why can't you be more like Tommy?" The girls all thought he was dreamy, which had been no big deal. Every neighborhood probably had a kid like that, the example held up to the rest of the kids. Until Tommy, who was a minister's son, decided to rat on a young Aaron Macomb for some minor offense. Macomb couldn't recall it exactly. Something about stealing something from another kid. Macomb had paid one of the larger school bullies $20 to beat the shit out of Tommy. The young Mr. Sunshine had landed in the hospital with 2 broken ribs, a fractured jaw, and a face scarred for life. Not so dreamy after that, was he? Kind of like Walker. Wonder where he got that scar. The senator allowed a fleeting nostalgic pleasure at the thought of Tommy, and ate another peanut. If only all his problems could be solved so simply. Lawrence was still talking like a fucking idiot. A shift away from you in men under 25 and women over 40. And I'm not sure if we can come up with a plank that appeases both groups. On the other hand, you're gaining with the pro-heirs, life and death penalty, and America for Americans. He frowned thoughtfully. The bad news is, the campaign finance chairman put together a projected budget, and it's a big number, Senator. Even going back again, I don't know how you could get it all in time. Macomb snapped. He didn't think, just grabbed Lawrence. A red, pounding haze filled the air, clouded his sight. He threw Lawrence's head as hard and as far as he could. The man's skull cracked, blood spattered the seat, yet no, not the skull. It was only the crack of glass against bone, and the cut was tiny, hardly anything. Lawrence fell into the corner, cowered there, his scalp blood smeared on the tinted window. Macomb sighed. Palmer smiled meanly, enjoying Lawrence's pain. Now, I love you, Lawrence, I really do, he said patiently. But don't tell me what I can't do. Never, ever tell me what I can't do. Elections are won with television. You don't need the press. You don't need endorsements. And you don't need the truth. Lawrence, all you need is money. He studied his aide's bleeding face to see if he understood. Lawrence nodded numbly, dazed perhaps. Now, what is it going to cost me to buy the network time I need? Lawrence spoke timidly. Over $50 million. He shrank a bit farther into the corner, frightened. And Agent Walker has already cost me that much, McComb said. He looked at Palmer and smiled. Before I send someone else back, I want us to have a little chat with Walker. The kind of talk a man remembers for a lifetime, however long or short that might be. Palmer smiled back. Lawrence touched his bleeding head in shock. McComb went back to his peanuts. A little too salty. He'd have to remind Lawrence to lighten up on that. It had been a pretty good day, all in all.